Hey nerds, Todd Simmons coming back at you with a little Toddomation. This set of videos is going to be a little different. It's not really going to focus on the automation. I've had lots of requests where someone says, hey, the automation is great, but can you maybe talk about the actual networking aspect of things? And that's what this video series is going to start with. I'm going to call it Networking Demystified. This particular video is going to be based on the networking models that we have. So this is just kind of an overview into the different models. And then after this, I'm actually going to start doing a deep dive. But what I want to do with this video series is use as little technical jargon as possible. Now, when we're talking about networking, there's certain things that we're just going to have to say or certain acronyms that we're going to have to use. But what I want to do is kind of get beyond the acronyms and the different ways that we describe different aspects of the network, and then explain it in terms that everybody should be able to understand. I'm not here to talk tech and to be super nerdy with you. What I want to do is explain the different pieces of the networks in order to just demystify them from individuals maybe that hasn't been doing this for very long. It's just kind of jumping into it, or a review for somebody that just hasn't been in the networking world for a long time. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to talk about is these different networking models. Okay, and you might ask yourself, well, why do we need models? Well, the easiest way to explain it is it kind of creates a common ground. And when you think about it, you have products or different pieces of hardware, whether it be your computer, whether it be access points, whether it be AWS's computer, whether it be a different web server. All these different computers or all these different pieces and parts are made by a bunch of different manufacturers. So having this network model eliminates the need to have products from just one company. When networking started a long time ago, a lot of the products, when you purchased, they didn't actually work with each other. So if you picked a particular vendor, you had to stick with that vendor. Networking models removed the need to only have particular vendors inside your network. And we're going to discuss those different models today on this video. Specifically, how many are out there? Well, that kind of depends on who you ask, and you're going to get different answers. I'm going to tell you that there's 3 different networking models. First of all, there's the Open Systems Interconnection model, or the OSI. That's the most well-known of the particular models because it was the first model back in the 70s that was created. After the OSI model came what we call the Transmission Control Protocol Internet Protocol, or TCP-IP model. And this is a model that was more widespread used once the internet came about, and we actually chose TCP/IP as the primary protocol that was going to be associated with the internet. And then the very last model, what I call the IRL model, and we'll jump into that as well. So one thing that I do want everybody to understand is that each of these models use layers, and think of layers as items that are stacked on top of each other. That's what I mean by layers. And we're going to jump pretty deep into the layers. A little bit in this particular video, and then in the next videos, we're actually going to go very deep into the layers. So that leads me to the next question. Why are layers required? Well, in order for operability, in other words, in order for different manufacturers' parts to work together, we needed to have the layers that identified what should be done where. And once again, I don't want to get super technical about it, okay? But the layers allow us to make sure that the process, right, whatever process of sending an email, receiving an email, going to a web page, okay, those types of things, the same process is going to be followed every single time, regardless if you have a Macintosh computer, whether you have a Windows computer, whether you're running Linux, okay, whether you're going to yahoo.com, whether you're going to microsoft.com. These layers are going to allow us, regardless of where we're going and what pieces of equipment we actually have, these layers allow us to make sure that that same process is followed every single time. Okay? The other thing is, if I want to like I said, I wanted to demystify this. So we're surrounded by layers for lots of different things that we do on a daily basis, okay? Because layers are just steps or stages of a particular process, and then you have to do them in order. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to use the best example I could come up with, and that was baking a cake. So hopefully everybody here has baked a cake or baked something or cooked something, but I'm going to create this model of baking a cake. And my particular model that I'm going to use here is going to have 9 layers. If I can get my pen to work. Okay, so I'm going to have 9 total layers here. Now, I'm not making a 9-layer cake. I'm just going to have 9 layers. As you can see, my layers are listed here. The first layer going all the way down over here to this bottom layer. And the way that the layers work is they're kind of instructions. Okay, so obviously the first thing that you have to do is you have to make a list and purchase those ingredients that you're going to be using to bake that cake. Then you're going to combine those ingredients into a baking dish. Then you're going to turn on the oven. Then you're going to place the dish inside the oven. Now you might be thinking, okay, Todd, can you hurry it up? Well, let's think about this, right? And this is how I want you to think about layers. Is layers have got to be accomplished in order. You can't skip one. And this is what I mean. So let's say if you made a list, okay, and then you purchased all of the cake ingredients. You can't just immediately go to remove the cake from the oven because you didn't follow the process. There isn't a cake in the oven, okay? Because the only thing that you did was made the list and purchased those particular ingredients. So this is what makes layers important, is that with layers, you must move from one layer to the next and then complete that one, okay? And then when you complete this one, you can move to the next layer, but not before the previous layer was completed. Then, when you've turned on the oven, now you're actually ready to place the cake inside the oven. Okay. Now, if you place the cake inside the oven for 60 seconds, okay, you could remove the cake from the oven, okay, but it's not going to be edible at that particular point because you didn't leave it in there long enough. So, what I'm saying when I talk about layers is the layers are just the different processes that are going to be followed in order to come to completion. So if you're making a cake, you would have to follow all of these steps, completing each step before you moved on to the next step. And there's no different in networking. It's just a set of processes that are going to be accomplished. Just the term that we use for these processes is called layers, and that's how we identify them. So hopefully that maybe demystified what layers are. So now that we understand layers, let's actually jump into the first model, and this is the OSI model, or the Open System Interconnection Model. Nobody says Open Systems Interconnection. Everybody just says OSI model, and we all pretty much know what it means because this is where everything started when it came from networks. So the thing with the Open System Interconnection Model is it was created to show conceptually how data would flow across the network from your computer to another computer using these layers. And I don't want to talk about the layers at this particular point. Just understand that this was the first model that was used back in the 1970s. You're going to hear OSI model throughout your entire career, okay? So one thing to understand is the OSI model, when it was created, it was conceptual, and it's still conceptual to this day. What that means is it was, you know what, if you did it this way, it should work. That's what they mean by a conceptual model, saying if you would follow these individual steps for what it is that you're looking to accomplish, as far as whether it would be networking or making a cake, okay, doing this in these stages, just like we talked about with the cake, is going to allow you to get to the end result. And remember, we're talking about, different devices that are manufactured by different organizations. And this OSI model was a way for them to kind of come together and say, okay, if we all follow these same set of rules or these processes, or if we all bake the cake the same way, right? Once we get to the end of it, we should be able to eat that cake. And that's what the Open Systems Interconnection did, or the OSI model did, for networking between different manufacturers. Okay, now the OSI model uses 7 layers that we're going to talk about, but there's a problem with the OSI model because it's conceptual. And in conceptual, that means that if you did this, it should work. The issue with, or the problem with the OSI model is nobody ever actually used the OSI model in its entirety, okay? But it was used as a guideline in order to make different pieces of the network work. So I want to talk to you about the OSI model. We're going to briefly go over the 7 layers of the OSI model, but we're not going to do a deep dive. Remember, this is just an overview of the different models that we have for networking. So, as we said, there's 7 layers, okay? If we start at the bottom, and you'll see why we call this the bottom, which is the first layer, is the physical. Then we move up into the data link. And let me get my board over here. And then after the data link, right, we come into our network layer, okay? So this is layer 1, layer 2, and then layer 3, okay? And moving up, and this is called moving up the stack, right? We get to transport, session, presentation, and application. So these are the 7 layers of the OSI model. And there's different ways to memorize them, okay, as far as how they go. Me personally, the way that I learned is through a little saying, okay, that uses the first letter of each one of the layers. So as we look at the physical would be please, okay, then data link would be do, network would be not, okay, transport would be throw, okay, session is sausage, presentation is pizza, and then application is away. So the term that I've always used to remember all of the layers is please do not throw sausage pizza away. And every time I think about the different layers of the OSI model, that still pops into my head to this day. And it worked. There's other ways that you can do it. That just happens to be the way that I learned it. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. So starting at the top of the OSI model, which would be layer 7, is the application layer. We're going to get much deeper into the application layer, but a very, very, very common misconception is the application layer is the actual application that you're using. Okay, say you're using a web browser and Microsoft Edge, or you're using Google Chrome, or you're using Firefox. That's not the application that we're talking about. Okay, that's actually just a GUI that allows you to use different networking applications. So the application that is actually being talked about, or one of the applications here, is this domain name service, or DNS. And this is what I call the secret of the internet. This right here, the DNS application, is what made the internet what it is today, in Todd's opinion. Okay, but the domain name service, this is actually the service that takes the name that you type in on your web browser, so www.yahoo.com, www.toddomation.io, okay, and it actually translates that into the actual address where that web page is going to be found. So once again, not trying to get super deep, okay, but that's the application, because these are networking applications, not specifically user applications, okay. The next item there is this presentation layer. Okay, the presentation layer, according to the OSI model, is kind of the way that it formats it and puts it into place. The OSI model really thought the idea with encryption and decryption, okay, should be done here at this particular layer. Okay, after we get to the presentation layer, we talk about the session layer. So the session layer is actually the session between two devices. So when you're opening up a web page and you're typing www.yahoo.com or www.youtube.com, you're actually opening a session with the YouTube server or the Yahoo server or whatever website you're going to, and you're actually establishing a session using a particular protocol. And this is the session here, and it's actually between the end user, which would be you. You would have initiated that session, and the application processes on that server. Once again, not trying to get overly technical, just understand that that's what the session layer does. It's just kind of a way for you to, YouTube being you in whatever server or Yahoo or Instagram or Twitter, X, wherever you're going. That's just what the session layer, just kind of setting it up so your device can talk to their devices. Okay, so that's the application presentation session. Let's move on to the other layers here. So as we can see, this is the OSI continued. The next one we're going to look at is the transport layer. Okay, the transport layer actually provides the communication from that server that you went to, Yahoo server, right? Twitter server, Facebook server, and your actual computer when you typed out. Now remember, your computer doesn't have to be a computer. It could be your phone. It doesn't matter. Okay, we're just talking about network connectivity. So when something says host to host communication, that just means that two devices. So, it could be your iPhone, or it could be your Android, or it could be your Mac, or it could be your Windows computer, and then you're talking to another computer. And each one of those devices is called a host. Okay, so that's what the transport layer does. Okay, and you're going to hear a lot about this transport layer. Okay, and the protocol typically associated with this is going to be TCP. It's the best one, best known one anyway, that we're going to talk about. We're going to do a deep dive on that in a different video. Next, after that, we come into what's called the network layer. And the network layer is really cool. This is actually how things get from point A all the way to point B. So if I was going to explain the network layer to you, let's say you were going to drive from your house to the post office, okay? The route that you took, in other words, you backed out of your house, out of your driveway, right? And then, you drove down the street, you got to the stop sign, you took a left at the stop sign, right? You actually giving directions to somebody how to get to the post office. That's what the network layer is. It's just exact, specific instructions. Come to the stop sign, take a left. Okay, go 2 blocks, right? On Sycamore Street, you take a right. Then you go down 3 more blocks. That's all the network layer is doing. It's providing very specific instructions on how to get from where you started to where you're trying to go. So really, really, really cool part of networking. Next, after the networking layer, we come to the data link layer. Okay, the data link layer is going to be based on each individual link. So if the networking layer was the entire path on how to get from your house over to the post office, the data link layer would be each turn. Okay, so when I said that you went from your house, which was here, and then you backed out of the driveway and you went down to the street, right? And there was a stop sign right here. Okay, well, this was the first leg, right? This was, you had to stop, something changed right here. Now, then you went left, okay? And then I said you went 3 blocks, then you took a right and you went this way. Well, this entire area is the actual path, but the data link is going to be each of these areas, okay, at which something changed. So when you change direction, okay, that's going to be the data link, and it's the link, right? And link is obviously a networking term, but think of it as when you go to directions, I like to think of it as, well, from where you turned, okay, which as you can see, we backed out of our driveway, there really wasn't a turn, and we went down here to the stop sign, okay? and then we took a left. Well, this was an individual link in the total path that you went. And if you think about it, with instructions, when it comes to, coming from your house to getting to the post office, every turn or every change that you made, that would be a particular piece of the path that you used to follow. Okay, and we'll get more into that. And then the last thing is the physical layer. This is the actual items that you can touch. Okay, so the physical layer, let's say you have a cable, right? You've got that cable plugged into your computer. Well, this is physical layer. Okay, you have to have some sort of connectivity into the network in order for your devices to get on the internet or to print or to talk to other devices that are on the network. You have to have some sort of connectivity. The only time this gets a little confusing is even though the physical layer where you're plugging cables in, that's pretty easy, right? But the other aspect is Wi-Fi. So let's say you've got a Wi-Fi access point here, okay? And that Wi-Fi access point is emitting an RF signal. Okay, well, this RF is also considered physical layer because it's what's providing you connectivity to some sort of device that's putting you on the network, which would typically be an access point, or maybe it's your home router. Let's say you got a Netgear or a Linksys or something like that at home, and it's giving you that wireless signal. That radio frequency that you're using to connect to the network is also considered physical layer. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more on physical layer here in a bit. But that's it. Those are the 7 layers of the OSI model, as you can see over here on the right. Okay, so we'll do a deeper dive, not specifically into all of the layers of the OSI, but you're going to see that we're going to do a deeper dive into the IRL type model once we get there. So after the OSI model, okay, came the next model, and the next model was what we call the TCP-IP stack. Okay, so I don't want to get too deep into the history because I don't think it really matters, right? If you're looking for some sort of certification test, you're going to have to know this. Okay, they're going to ask you specific questions on that certification test about the OSI model, just because it was the very, very first model in the models that we actually use. Because remember, the OSI model was only to be used in reference. It wasn't a working model. So the first actual working model that we came up with was this TCP-IP model. Okay, and this was the model, or this was the stack, quite frankly, that the internet was built on. Okay, so this was the first model that was actually put into use, okay, that everybody could use. So there were some other models, there was Apple Talk and Novell Networks and other types of stacks that use different protocols that were way back then. They're all gone pretty much as far as being used by the masses, and we've switched over somewhat to this TCP-IP protocol. And when you look at it, it just combines certain things into one. So we have the application, the presentation, and the session layers of the OSI model. Okay, well, TCP just calls that the application layer now. Because quite frankly, all 3 of these things are done in software. And because that software is going to be tied to a particular application, okay, that's why they just broke it down and said, you know what, we're not going to do application, presentation, session, we're just going to call it application. Okay, as you can see next, the transport layer, okay, does the same thing, right? It's actually, using TCP/IP or something called UDP, and we're going to get into that later. Okay, that actually is making that connection happen between those 2 devices. The transport layer is when those 2 devices are talking. So if you make a phone call to somebody, okay, and then you start talking to them, right? The cell phone company or the telephone company, they're providing the transport because now you're talking back and forth. The internet is no different. Okay? Absolutely no different. You have one device talking to another device. You have you calling somebody on the phone, and when they answer, you start speaking, right? What makes that happen is that transport layer. Okay. Next, we have the network layer. Okay, and the TCP model calls that internet. Okay, and then the data link and the physical. Okay, the TCP/IP stack called that network access. Okay, so these sections do essentially what the OSI model said, and we're going to get really deep into the different layers here in corresponding videos. But please understand that these terms are just kind of a change in the term, and instead of having all of these layers at this particular point, right, the TCP-IP came up and said, you know what, we're just going to have 4 layers: application, transport, internet, and network access. Okay, so when that was done, there was a little bit of an issue, because nobody really used the term the internet layer for network. That was just confusing. Why? Because the internet's pretty big now. So if you said, oh, well, that's the internet layer, well, that actually doesn't make a lot of sense as far as the term that's being used. Okay, so that never really caught on. Okay, and then the data link and the physical layers, they're very different. Yes, they require each other. Okay, each of these physical connections is a link. Okay, but they were so very different that we didn't actually start saying network access either. Okay, this is where I get into what I'm saying is my third model, okay, according to Toddomation, and that is my IRL, or my in real life model. Okay, in the IRL model, and there's nothing official about the IRL model, okay, but as a network engineer, as a network architect, or somebody that's working on the network, these are the terms that you will be using, I guarantee it. Okay? So when we break these particular terms down, as you can see, we kept the application layer the same. Okay? And we just call it application. Okay? Now, you might notice that now we have 5 total layers over here in the IRL, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and this would be called 5. Okay? We don't call this layer 5. It's just the application layer. Okay? So don't think, oh, well, if, I could just call that layer 5 because that's what it is. Not really. In real life, we don't actually say layer 5. We're only concerned with these 4 layers as we're talking about them, okay, when it comes to the network, because a lot of the parts of the application itself, as network engineers or network architects, we don't control that. But we certainly control these 4 coming down here. And that's what we're going to look at next. So the transport layer, guess what? Still called transport. Okay. The internet layer, I told you we did not use that. So we actually just carried this over to here. So we're using the OSI network layer. We are not using the term internet layer as provided in the TCP. And notice we also carried this data link layer and this physical layer back over. Okay? So when we talk about the in real life model, or the way that we're going to be discussing it in this course, there's really 4 layers, and then there's the application. Okay, so this is what we're going to concentrate on, is these 4 layers. And the reason I call it the IRL is it's kind of a combination, right? For the most part, it's the OSI model, okay, of the first 4 layers, and then we've just combined this into what we call the app, or the application at that particular point. Okay, so moving forward, this is how we're going to reference every aspect of this network. So that's the models. Okay, now we're going to get a little deeper into the models, but that's the models as far as an overview for a general understanding for everybody that's watching this video. So the next video that's going to come out, we're going to break down layer 1. Okay, then obviously we're going to go 2, 3, 4, and really give you an understanding of what those layers are doing with each other and how they work. So, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have questions, please leave comments, right? Like, subscribe. I really appreciate the subscriptions. My channel is very, very nerdy, a very specific audience, so when I get a subscriber, it really means a lot. So I certainly appreciate it. If you have a question, please ask your question. I promise you I will respond to your question. I respond to every question that I get. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and hopefully you're fixing to watch another one. Until then, we'll talk to y'all later, nerds. Bye.